Chapter 1. Routine Flight, Unexpected Turbulence. Charles Harrison, a successful businessman, boarded a flight expecting a peaceful journey. What started as a routine trip quickly turned into a shocking encounter that left everyone speechless. Watch as the truth unfolds. The airport buzzed with life. Travelers rushed past. Announcements echoed through the terminals, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the sterile chill of the air conditioning. Charles adjusted the strap of his worn leather backpack, his eyes carefully scanning the bustling terminal as he approached the check-in counter. Dressed in a simple gray hoodie and faded jeans, he blended into the crowd, just another face in the sea of passengers. And that was exactly what he wanted. The check-in agent barely glanced at him as she processed his ticket. "You're in economy," she said flatly, tapping at the screen with disinterest. Charles offered a polite nod, suppressing a smile. If only she knew. As he made his way through security, he couldn't help but notice the subtle differences in how he was treated compared to others around him. The businessman in the tailored suit ahead of him was greeted warmly, while Charles received a quick, indifferent glance. Years of experience had trained him to expect it, but it never got easier. Boarding was no different. The flight attendant stationed at the entrance scanned his ticket, her smile faltering slightly when she saw his name. "Are you sure this is the right seat, sir?" she asked, her eyes flickering towards a first-class section just beyond. Charles kept his voice steady. "Pretty sure," he said, stepping past her without waiting for further comment. As he settled into his seat in economy, he overheard whispers behind him. Two flight attendants chatted in hushed tones. "Did you see that guy in 14A? Looks out of place, doesn't he?" Charles exhaled slowly, gripping the armrest. This was exactly why he was here. He pulled out his phone, pretending to scroll through emails, but his mind was already racing. The test had begun, and soon enough, the real challenges would present themselves. Charles leaned back in his seat, letting the low hum of the engines fill his ears. He could feel the tension creeping in, the quiet but unmistakable weight of scrutiny. From the corner of his eye, he caught the flight attendant, Jessica, according to her name tag, whispering to her colleague, Ashley, a blonde woman with an air of practiced poise. "He's probably in the wrong seat," Jessica muttered, not bothering to lower her voice enough. Ashley chuckled softly. "Or it's one of those upgrade scams they always try, you know." Charles tightened his grip on his phone, scrolling mindlessly through his emails to mask the frustration brewing inside. He'd been here before, too many times. But today it felt personal. The words, the assumptions, the casual disregard, they were all too familiar, yet they still stung. Chapter 2. Questionable Confirmation. Moments later, Jessica approached with an artificial smile plastered across her face. "Sir, can I see your ticket again, just to confirm?" Charles handed it over without a word, watching as her eyes darted from the boarding pass to his face, scanning him with barely concealed suspicion. She hummed, her lips pursed. "I'll need to check something with the front desk. I'll be right back." As she turned away, Charles heard a passenger across the aisle mutter, "Why are they treating him like that?" A middle-aged woman dressed in a business suit gave him an apologetic glance. He offered a slight nod in return, acknowledging the silent support. A few minutes later, Jessica returned with Ashley and a tablet. "Sir," she began, feigning a patient tone, "your ID looks a little different from your profile on our system. Are you sure it hasn't been recently updated?" Charles exhaled slowly, his voice calm but firm. "It's my ID, and I fly this airline quite often. I assure you there's no mistake." Ashley shifted uncomfortably, sensing the unease settling among the surrounding passengers. Charles could see the battle playing out in their eyes, the struggle between protocol and prejudice. He leaned back and smiled faintly. "Perhaps you should double-check again. I have all day." Jessica's face tightened, but she turned on her heel without another word. Charles watched her disappear into the galley. He could feel the eyes of those around him, some curious, others uncomfortable. He closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. This was only the beginning. Chapter 3. Escalation. Charles sat in his seat, his patience thinning with every passing second. He could hear Jessica and Ashley whispering a few rows behind him, their voices low but laced with skepticism. He had expected resistance, but the persistence of their doubt was beginning to grate on him. The flight had just reached cruising altitude when Jessica returned, standing beside him with her arms crossed, her expression taut. "Sir, our system still isn't recognizing your details properly. You wouldn't mind stepping to the front for a moment, would you?" Charles looked up at her, calm but unwavering. "I do mind," he said, his voice steady. "I paid for this seat, and I intend to stay here. Unless, of course, there's a valid reason I should move." Jessica hesitated, clearly not expecting pushback. "It's just protocol," she muttered, glancing around nervously as nearby passengers watched the exchange with interest. The businessman across the aisle, the same one who had noticed earlier, leaned in slightly. "Excuse me," he said, his tone polite but pointed. "This gentleman has provided his ticket and ID multiple times. Is there an issue here?" Jessica's face flushed. "No, sir, it's just a routine check," she replied quickly before turning back to Charles. "Sir, I'll have to escalate this if you refuse." Charles took a slow breath, keeping his cool. "Do what you need to do," he said, leaning back in his seat. "I'll be right here." Chapter 4. The lead attendant arrives. Minutes later, Ashley returned with the lead flight attendant, an older man with graying hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Harrison," he said, reading from his tablet, "it seems there's been some confusion regarding your booking. We need to verify." "Let me stop you right there," Charles interjected, his voice low but commanding, drawing the attention of everyone around. "I presented my ID, my ticket, and I've been nothing but cooperative. The issue here isn't my seat, it's your assumptions." The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Jessica shifted uneasily, while Ashley looked down at the floor, clearly regretting the path this had taken. A passenger a few rows up took out their phone, recording the exchange discreetly. Charles noticed, but remained focused on the lead attendant, who sighed and nodded. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Harrison. Our apologies for the inconvenience." Jessica opened her mouth to protest, but a stern look from the lead attendant shut her down. Charles exhaled and turned his gaze back to the window, but he could feel the energy shift around him. The whispers in the cabin grew louder, and he could see the uneasy glances exchanged between the crew. Chapter 5. The aftermath goes viral. He glanced at his phone, where notifications were already lighting up. A quick search on social media showed that a clip of the earlier exchange had been posted and was quickly gaining traction. Comments flooded in. "Why does this always happen? You'd think they'd know better by now. Handle like a pro. Respect." Charles put his phone away, focusing instead on what lay ahead. He wasn't done yet. As the plane began its descent, Charles looked out the window, watching the city lights grow closer. This wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was about the everyday battles fought in silence, the ones that didn't always have an audience or a happy ending. But today, at least, justice had been swift, and that was a step in the right direction. Chapter 6. Charles's Reflections. Charles wasn't merely a successful businessman. He was the CEO of a major corporation, a company renowned for its commitment to diversity and inclusion. He had spent years working to dismantle systemic biases within his own organization and beyond. This wasn't just a personal affront. It was a direct challenge to everything he stood for. The airline industry, he knew, had a long way to go in terms of addressing issues of racial profiling and discriminatory practices. He had heard countless stories from friends, colleagues, and even strangers about similar experiences they had endured while traveling. This incident on Flight 328 was simply another example of a pervasive problem. As he disembarked the plane, Charles knew that he couldn't let this incident pass without taking action. He wasn't interested in seeking personal retribution or demanding apologies. He wanted to use this experience as an opportunity to effect meaningful change within the airline industry and to raise awareness about the insidious nature of unconscious bias. Chapter 7. Meeting with airline executives. The following day, Charles contacted the CEO of the airline, requesting a meeting to discuss the incident on Flight 328. To his surprise, the CEO, a woman named Elizabeth Sterling, responded immediately and expressed her sincere concern about what had transpired. Elizabeth was known for her progressive leadership and her commitment to creating a more inclusive workplace. She had been working hard to improve the airline's diversity and inclusion initiatives, but she recognized that there was still much work to be done. During their meeting, Charles shared his experience on Flight 328, emphasizing that the issue was not about him personally, but about the systemic biases that allowed such incidents to occur. He presented a series of concrete recommendations for how the airline could improve its training programs, revise its policies, and foster a more inclusive culture. Elizabeth listened intently to Charles's suggestions, expressing her gratitude for his candor and his willingness to work with her to address the problem. She promised to take his recommendations seriously and to implement meaningful changes within the airline. Chapter 8. Training Overhaul. One of the first steps that Elizabeth took was to overhaul the airline's employee training programs. She brought in experts in diversity and inclusion to develop a new curriculum that would educate employees about unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and conflict resolution. The training programs were designed to be interactive and engaging, using real-life scenarios and case studies to illustrate the impact of bias on customer interactions. Employees were encouraged to share their own experiences and perspectives, creating a safe and supportive environment for open and honest dialogue. Elizabeth also made it clear that participation in the training programs was mandatory for all employees, from senior executives to ground staff. She wanted to ensure that everyone within the airline was committed to creating a more inclusive and welcoming environment for all passengers. Chapter 9. Policy Revisions and Community Outreach. In addition to the training programs, Elizabeth also revised the airline's policies to address issues of racial profiling and discriminatory practices. She implemented a zero-tolerance policy for any form of discrimination and established a clear process for reporting and investigating complaints. She also partnered with community organizations to provide scholarships and mentorship programs for students from underrepresented backgrounds who were interested in pursuing careers in the airline industry. Elizabeth understood that creating lasting change required a multifaceted approach that addressed both internal policies and external outreach. She was committed to transforming the airline into a model of diversity and inclusion, both within its own workforce and within the communities it served. Chapter 10. Jessica and Ashley's Journey. The lead flight attendant, whose name was David, pulled Jessica and Ashley aside after the incident. His tone was stern, but also tinged with disappointment. He explained that their actions had not only been unprofessional, but had also perpetuated harmful stereotypes and prejudices. He required them to attend sensitivity training and to write a formal apology to Mr. Harrison. He also assigned them to work with a mentor who could help them understand the impact of their biases and develop strategies for avoiding similar incidents in the future. Jessica and Ashley were initially defensive, but as they participated in the training and worked with their mentor, they began to realize the extent of their unconscious biases. They had never intentionally discriminated against anyone, but they had allowed their assumptions and prejudices to cloud their judgment. They wrote heartfelt apologies to Mr. Harrison, expressing their remorse for their actions and their commitment to doing better in the future. They also volunteered to participate in community outreach programs, working with marginalized groups to promote understanding and empathy. Chapter 11. Charles's Return Flight, a Different Experience. A few months later, Charles boarded another flight on the same airline. He was curious to see if the changes that Elizabeth had implemented were making a difference. To his surprise, his experience on this flight was completely different. He was greeted warmly by the flight attendants, who treated him with respect and courtesy. He noticed that the crew seemed more diverse and that the overall atmosphere was more welcoming and inclusive. During the flight, Elizabeth Sterling came to speak with him personally, thanking him for his willingness to share his experience and for his contributions to the airline's diversity and inclusion initiatives. She assured him that the airline was committed to continuing to improve and to creating a better experience for all passengers. Charles was encouraged by the progress that the airline had made, but he knew that there was still much work to be done. He resolved to continue working with Elizabeth and other leaders in the industry to promote diversity, inclusion, and equality in the skies. Chapter 12. The Ripple Effect Extends. The story of Charles Harrison and the airline incident spread far and wide, inspiring other companies and organizations to take action to address issues of bias and discrimination. Universities implemented new diversity and inclusion courses. Corporations revised their hiring practices and training programs. Communities organized town hall meetings to discuss issues of race, equality, and social justice. Charles became a sought-after speaker and consultant, sharing his experiences and insights with audiences around the world. He continued to advocate for policies and practices that would promote diversity, inclusion, and equality for all. Chapter 13. David's Leadership. David, the lead flight attendant, became a champion for change within the airline. He mentored younger flight attendants, sharing his own experiences and emphasizing the importance of treating all passengers with respect and dignity. He also became involved in the airline's diversity and inclusion initiatives, helping to develop training programs and revise policies. He was a powerful advocate for creating a more inclusive and welcoming environment for both employees and passengers. David's leadership inspired others to step up and take action, creating a ripple effect of positive change throughout the airline. Chapter 14. Jessica's Advocacy. Jessica, after completing her sensitivity training, became a passionate advocate for diversity and inclusion. She shared her story with others, speaking openly about her past biases and her journey toward understanding and empathy. She volunteered with community organizations, working to promote understanding and to challenge prejudice. She also became involved in the airline's employee resource groups, helping to create a more supportive and inclusive environment for employees from underrepresented backgrounds. Jessica's transformation was a testament to the power of education, empathy, and a willingness to learn and grow. Chapter 15. Ashley's Community Work. Ashley, similarly impacted by the experience, found her calling in community service. She began volunteering at a local youth center, mentoring underprivileged kids and helping them develop their skills and talents. She used her own experiences to teach these young people about the importance of resilience, perseverance, and believing in themselves. She became a role model for them, showing them that they could overcome any obstacle and achieve their dreams. Ashley's work in the community had a profound impact on the lives of countless young people, helping them to break the cycle of poverty and to build a brighter future for themselves. Chapter 16. 10 years later. 10 years later, Charles Harrison was still actively involved in promoting diversity and inclusion. He had established a foundation to support organizations working to advance equality and social justice. The airline industry had made significant strides in addressing issues of bias and discrimination, thanks in part to Charles's advocacy and the leadership of Elizabeth Sterling and others. The world was not perfect, but was a better place because of the courage, compassion, and commitment of Charles Harrison and all those who had been inspired by his story.